I was at your boy Rico from Street Scores, and we're here to talk about Walter Football's predictions for the future of the Washington Commanders 2024 rookie class. This is not just predicting what's going to happen this year. He's basically predicting what's to come of the players that we took in this draft. He has 4 major categories. We're going to dive into those categories and who he picked for those categories and his explanations of why. I'm going to let you know if I agree or disagree with any of the points that he's making. He does this for every team, and he also has the history of every time that he's done this for the Washington Commanders, going all the way back to our 2013 rookie class. I'm assuming that's the year that he started doing this, because he goes all the way back to 2013 for all 4 categories for the Washington Commanders. Again, we're going to dive into his selections, and then I'm going to also make my own picks afterwards, and we're going to get into all of that and more. But before we do, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. I'm going to keep y'all updated on everything Commanders, every little thing that's going down. And y'all already know, once training camp kicks back up, I got y'all covered with every little detail. I'm gonna give y'all the clips of what's going on in the practices and everything like that, breaking every single thing down, position group by position group, even including the coaches and even special teams as well. So make sure you stay tuned for all of that. I can't wait. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this video, man. Let's get it. Adam. All right, so he has 4 major categories that he's choosing from, because you got to remember, we had a pretty decent sized draft class. I mean, we have more than 4 players that we took. You got to remember, we took Jaden Daniels in the first round, Johnny Newton, Mike Sanverstill, and Ben Sinnott in the second round, then Brandon Coleman and Luke McCaffrey in the third, then Jordan McGee and Dominique Hampton in the 5th, and then lastly Javonte Jean-Baptiste in the 7th. And there's only 4 categories, so he had to choose who he wanted to pick for each category, which one made the most sense for him. Just to let you know, the categories are solid starter, most likely to bust, potential boom pick, and future depth player. So we got to dive into who his picks are for those categories, and then again after that I'm gonna give you my picks for those categories. But I'm gonna change it up, because we're not doing most likely to bust. I'm not even gonna put that type of bad energy out there for any of our draft picks, but I will replace it with another category. We'll cross that road when we get there. So starting with solid starter, his pick is Johnny Newton, of course, the defensive tackle out of Illinois, who we took in round 2. I already talked about in a video from days ago that Johnny Newton is very motivated to prove to people that he should have been a first round pick, like I feel like he should have been. I think he's a Pro Bowler just waiting to happen. I think he has that level of potential. I think not only is his addition to the team just gonna be great because of what he can do as far as being a pass rusher and a run stopper. He's coming in with a relatively high floor as well, with the pass rush moves and counters that he already has at his disposal in his utility belt and all of those things. But he's also gonna make guys like Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne better, because they're not gonna have to play in the 90% of snaps in any given game. Now they can be a part of like a healthy rotation. They'll stay fresher, they'll be more explosive, more efficient, they'll probably put up better stats because of it, even while playing less now. So I'm really excited about the Johnny Newton edition. So I agree with solid starter here, even though I picked a different player when I get to mine, because first of all, I didn't want to copy his answers, and I feel like we have multiple answers for a lot of these different categories, but also I just truly believe in the pick that I made. But Johnny Newton is a really solid second. And so what he said after Washington traded Montez Sweat and Chase Young, the Redskins were in the market for some defensive end help, and you know WalterFootball is going to call us Redskins forever. He never switched it up to Washington Football Team, never switched it up to Washington Commanders. So just to remind y'all, and I'm just reading straight from it. So new head coach Dan Quinn brought in some veteran free agents he's coached in previous stops, but many thought Washington would add more in talent in the draft. draft. I thought we would potentially go and try to get some edge rushers, especially way before we took one in the 7th round with Javonte Jean-Baptiste, so I agree there. Instead, Washington chose to bolster the defensive tackle position by taking Newton early in the 2nd round, and this was clearly just best player available. You could argue Johnny Newton was the best player out of the entire draft left by the time we took him with that early 2nd round pick. Continuing with WalterFootball said, as a pass rusher, Newton is impressive. He's athletic and twitchy at the point of attack with a burst to fire his gap. With developed strength and active hands, Newton will slap hands off of him and use his speed to dart past blockers. He has a real burst to close, and there is no doubt that Newton is a fast interior rusher. He has fluid hips to slide away from blockers and dart into openings to get after the quarterback. While Newton has a stocky build, he can run fast for a big man. As a pro, Newton has the potential to be an excellent interior pass rusher who produces some quality sack numbers while contributing several hits, pressures, and hurries that can help set up his edge rushers to get sacks as well. So basically his point is that even though the Commanders didn't go heavy in the draft for edge rushers, even though we did go and sign a few in free agency, but I'm not just gonna assume that those guys will just be what we hoped that Chase Young and Montez Sweat could have been as a duo. I feel like we just brought in the right coaching staff to be able to manufacture pressure even outside of what the edge rushers can do in just their own one-on-one battles as far as winning goes there. And you brought in Frankie Luvu, who can blitz up the middle. We're trying to transition Jamin Davis to a situational pass rushers type of guy as well. And then on top of that, his point is, WalterFootball, he said that Johnny Newton is so great at creating pressure in the middle, the offensive lines are going to have to focus on that. Or at the very worst, a quarterback is going to run away from Johnny Newton and then basically run into an edge rusher to where the edge rusher just pretty much has to play cleanup. I like that idea. I completely agree. Then continuing with what WalterFootball said, he said in the ground game, Newton looked better in 2022 than he did in 2023. In his final season, he was worse, but in both years, there were times when he got absolutely destroyed by offensive linemen. There were plays where he was pushed out of his gap and pushed around the field. At 6'2", 295 pounds, Newton has a short, stocky, sawed-off build that lacks length to help him as a run defender. But veteran tackles Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen are the starters for the 2023 season, but before too long, Allen might be a trade candidate as he is aging and expensive. The Redskins could groom Newton behind those veterans for some time and then have him ready to start. Now, I do agree that Johnny Newton's pass rush capabilities supersede his ability to stop the run. I definitely think he's a better pass rusher than he is a run stopper, but I'm not as low on his run stopping ability as maybe WalterFootball is. I think Johnny Newton is a Pro Bowl player waiting to happen. I think he can be on the field whether it's 4th and 1 or 3rd and 20. I think you can have on the field regardless. It's just the fact that we also have Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen still here, so it's going to be interesting to see how Dan Quinn and Joe Wood Jr. find a way to utilize all of those guys at the same time. And then with the history part, his picks for solid starter for the Washington Commanders going all the way back to 2013, you had Quan Martin, Fedarian Mathis, super missed on the Fedarian Mathis thing. I mean, it's not too late, but boy, Samuel Cosmi, Antonio Gandy Golden, that didn't work out. Dwayne Haskins didn't work out. R.I.P. Daron Payne, okay. Ryan Anderson, whoo. Josh Doxson, ooh. Preston Smith, Trent Murphy, Philip Thomas, I honestly don't even remember who that is, to be completely honest with you. Now moving on to the category of most likely to bust. And even before we move on again, I think Johnny Newton is probably my second pick, like right behind the guy that I'm going to talk about as far as solid starter. I think he has a chance to truly be like a real Pro Bowl threat. I just think this other guy, especially with us needing that, because Johnny Newton, again, it'd be different if Daron Payne and or Jonathan Allen were not here. One or two of those guys were gone, then maybe Johnny Newton would get enough snaps to truly prove that he could be that Pro Bowler. Whereas the guy that I'm going to pick, we really don't have anybody else that can even possibly fulfill that role. He's going to step in day one and start contributing immediately. I think Johnny Newton's going to have an impact immediately, but maybe not to the level of the pick that I have. You'll see when we get there. Now moving on to most likely to bust. Coming from WalterFootball, he picked Ben Sinnott, tight end out of Kansas State, and I completely disagree here. But let's read what he has to say. After getting rid of veteran Logan Thomas, Washington needed to find some tight end help in 2024 in the draft. Taking Sinnott in the second round was a bit of a reach for some others. I do not agree at all, but hey. But Washington valued him there and look at Sinnott as their future starter. Sinnott is capable of contributing as a blocker and some receiving ability, but his skill set is not special, and he's more of a number 2 tight end candidate. Again, I slightly disagree there. As a second round pick, Sennett should be a long-term starter, but I could see where they would want a more dynamic receiver as a three down starter. I do not think Sennett will be a bust, but I think he could be a disappointment and might not be more than a solid number 2 option. Now, I can't be too mad at that, even though I'm way higher on Ben Sennett there. At least he's not saying outright that he's going to be a bust. He's just projecting that maybe he just ends up being a really good number 2 tight end, and then whether it's Armani Rogers who develops into one or whoever, maybe somebody already on the roster, maybe we go get a guy in free agency or the draft in the future. But eventually he's saying that Ben Sennett will step into like a firm number 2 tight end role, and then there's going to be another guy that's going to be tight end 1. And basically he's assuming that Ben Sennett was drafted to be that tight end 1, and he will technically be somewhat of a bust because even though he's projected to be a tight end 1, maybe he only ends up being a tight end 2. I can't be too mad at that. I disagree with a lot of things he said throughout it, but I can see the logical thinking there. Even though I'm way higher on him, I think he will be a really good tight end 1, but I also truly believe in Armani Rogers' potential to the point that I think we'll just have 2 really good dynamic tight ends. Versatility and Ben Sennett's in, and then just elite athleticism and Armani Rogers is in. That's the tight end of the future. That's my duo of the future for the Commanders. And I like, of course, John Bates as well. He's arguably the best blocking tight end in the NFL, but I think he'll be like a solid, rotational piece when we need a dedicated blocker on a dedicated running play, like goal line type of situation. A guy that he's not just a third tackle on the field, because if you need him to, he can go out there and make a red zone catch for a touchdown. But I just think Ben Sennett and Armani Rogers are the future of the Commanders, and I don't necessarily see either one of them being like a tight end 1 or 2. I just think they'll both be really good. But either way, going back all the way to 2013 with his picks for most likely the bust for the Washington Commanders, he had Ricky Strongberg last year. Too early to tell. Even though I may not be as high on Ricky Strongberg as a lot of people in our fan base, but still too early to tell. Brian Robinson in 2022, I feel like he's very wrong there. 2021, he had Benjamin St. Juste. I feel like he's slightly wrong there. Antonio Gibson, I mean, maybe he never popped to the point that we thought, but I don't think he was a bust. I mean, first of all, he's a 3rd round pick, and I also think that given the right opportunities, I think he could explode. I wish he was still here right now. Wes Martin, yep. Trey Apke, yep. Monte Nicholson, he had his moments. That was fun. Sua Cravens, yep. Matt Jones, whoo, fumble problem. So much talent, fumble problem. Spencer Long, Chris Thompson, completely wrong. Chris Thompson definitely, I feel like, outplayed his draft pick. So I feel like he was definitely wrong with assuming that he would potentially be a bust there. Now, potential boom pick. Of course, he picks Jaden Daniels, and he has several paragraphs on Jaden Daniels. So we're going to kind of just skim through a little bit, maybe read some of the beginning, maybe some of the end. He said, Washington has needed a franchise quarterback since Alex Smith was injured. I would argue even before then. I would argue my entire lifetime. Again, I wasn't alive to see any of our Super Bowls. I was born after we won the final one. So I would argue my whole lifetime we've pretty much needed a franchise quarterback. And a new general manager, Adam Peters, went about filling the hole in the first draft, guiding the franchise. In his first draft, guiding the franchise. My fault. In Daniels, Peters added a game changer that is capable of generating huge point totals with dynamic dual threat ability. Daniels has boom pick potential for the NFL. As a passer, Daniels has a lot of ability for the next level. While he is generally accurate, he will miss some passes, but overall he's an accurate passer. His accuracy might be described as good but not elite. I disagree there though, but moving on. Regularly, Daniels throws some great passes, locating the ball well and leading his receiver to make the catch and pick up additional yards. I completely agree. Daniels lofts in some beautiful passes down the field, and his deep ball accuracy is exceptional. Completely agree there. When Daniels sees a receiver break free downfield, he will put excellent touch on the ball to drop it in with a very catchable pass for his receivers. I completely agree. And entering the next level, Daniels' natural deep ball accuracy is going to be very impressive. Completely agree. My fault. Woo-wee. And again, he wrote an entire essay of Jaden Daniels alone. But we're just going to go ahead and skip to the last paragraph and a half. He said, in terms of his ability on the ground, Daniels reminds me of this analyst of Lamar Jackson in terms of explosive speed, cutting ability, and elusiveness. And Daniels is very fast for a quarterback, and he will run away from defenders. Daniels also is elusive as a runner, and he will juke and dodge defenders to accelerate into space. On top of his speed and quickness, Daniels has a sturdy build that gives him the strength to take hits. However, as a pro, he must learn to slide, as he was too physical as a runner. There's no doubt that Daniels has to slide more to cut down his injury risk. In the NFL, Daniels could be a running threat like Lamar Jackson is for the Ravens. Daniels could be a boom pick for Washington and finally give them the franchise quarterback that they have so desperately needed. I love it. I absolutely love that right there. Can't argue against that at all. And then as far as his past picks for the Washington Commanders drafts, for a potential boom pick like we just talked about with Jaden Daniels, he had Emmanuel Forbes, still too early to see. Jahan Dotson, we'll see. Jamin Davis, I understand. Chase Young, you understand. Montez Sweat, you can understand. Darius Geis, if he wasn't just so bad off the field, you can understand. Jonathan Allen, that worked out. Kendall Fuller maybe didn't necessarily work out to the extent of some people had as far as hopes coming out of the draft, but Kendall Fuller has been one of our most consistent players. Forget corner, forget secondary, forget defense, just overall players, period, that we've had for years. I mean, the fact that he ended up getting traded away and we did whatever it took to bring him back eventually tells you what you need to know. Brandon Sheriff, obviously. I mean, big time. Morgan Moses, at times, very dependable. A lot of people ran him out of Washington, but I felt like he was pretty dependable. And David Emerson, he had some moments, but not necessarily. That didn't, I mean, but then again, my memory's a little foggy going all the way back there. And then he has future depth player. He picked Luke McCaffrey, wide receiver out of Rouse, that we took in round 3 for this one. Just a short paragraph here explaining his decision. He said Washington had their starting receivers set with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, but Washington was in need of some depth betting them. Well, I guess behind them, he meant to say. So there's a lot of typos in here, if y'all haven't noticed. McCaffrey can come in and compete with the likes of De'Ami Brown and Jamison Crowder to be their third receiver. McCaffrey might lack the physical talent to be an outside starter in the NFL. I would disagree. I think his ceiling is elite. Now, I don't necessarily project him to be an outside wide receiver immediately year 1, but as he starts to pick up a lot of nuance, route running, learn and release package and things like that, I think he has the physical ability to definitely do so. Continuing with what he said, but I think he could be a nice rotational receiver that contributes out of the slot. Washington will probably need to draft a true number 1 outside receiver for Jaden Daniels in the next year or 2. McCaffrey could end up being a nice rotational backup wide receiver. Yeah, I mean, I disagree. I don't think we're going to need to take like a true number 1 outside receiver anytime soon. I really don't. I think we're pretty solid here. I'm really high on Luke McCaffrey. That's just me personally. Then going back for his picks as far as future depth player. Sam Howell, still too early to tell, but De'Ami Brown is starting to look like it a little bit. Sadiq Charles, I mean, Terry McLaurin missed on that, but most people didn't see Terry McLaurin becoming what he ended up becoming. Tim Settle, and I think he was pretty good. Jeremy Sprinkle, ooh. Nate Sudfeld, ooh, I forgot we drafted him. Martrell Spate, don't really remember. Lache Seastrunk, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. I don't even remember that running back. And then Brandon Jenkins, the outside linebacker. Again, my memory gets a little fuzzy once we start to get that far back. I mean, not only do I have to keep up with the Washington Commanders, but my Georgia Bulldogs and all the recruiting classes and keeping up with all these high school kids, like 600 or plus of them every year with the recruiting cycle. So excuse me when we start to go back like 10 years, things start to get a little fuzzy for me. I apologize. But those were his picks, again, for the categories of future depth player, potential boom pick, most likely to bust, and solid starter, and also the history behind them. So now, what would I do as far as my answers? Who would I pick for those different categories? Now, we're just going to go ahead and keep Jaden Daniels out because it's easy to pick him for several of these categories. I mean, I could easily pick him for at least 2 of them, a boom pick and solid starter. I think he can fill both of those. I think he can end up being both really at the same time. But we're just going to keep Jaden Daniels out of it because he's just such an obvious pick for some of these. I want to dive deeper into that. I don't want to do the cop-out of your number 2 overall pick in the first round for being and being a quarterback, the most important position in all of sports. I don't want to do that cop out, so we're going to keep Jaden Daniels out. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to project the bust. I'm not doing that. I'll throw in an extra category just for y'all of will outperform their draft pick. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be negative. I'm not projecting a bust. I can't even look at these guys like that. I'm so glass half full, so optimistic. I can see where any one of these guys could end up potentially being a Pro Bowler. I mean, even Javonte John Baptiste, who we took in the 7th round, I think he has some traits that if everything goes right for him, he could end up being a great player. But that's just me. That's me being a fan of the Washington Commanders and also just a very optimistic person, just in general in life, even outside of sports. So I refuse to project a bust. I'm not saying that all of these draft picks will be great, but I'm just not going to put that out there. I'm just not putting that energy out there. So again, I will replace potential bust with will outperform the draft pick that they were chosen at the round they were chosen, especially as an additional category to make sure I have 4 categories. Now moving on to solid starter instead of Johnny Newton, who WalterFootball picked, again, who I felt like was a close second. And there are several options that we have here. I feel like out of our entire draft class, I feel like we're going to look back years from now and be like, that draft class was elite, one of the best draft classes we've ever seen from the burgundy and gold. And it was Adam Peters' first one, and I'm hoping that he continues to have more and more of those. So I really had to just narrow it down to the guy that I believe the most, like has the safest chance of being a solid starter. And again, Johnny Newton is a close second, but also have to add to the fact that he's dealing with the foot injuries right now. Both of them. Technically, he recovered from one already. Now he's dealing with the second one. So just by default, I'm going to have to go with Mike Sanders still there because I feel like I said earlier, Johnny Newton, I think, is going to be a Pro Bowl caliber player. But as of right now, he may not even necessarily be able to put up the numbers and even play enough to show the Pro Bowl ability. You'll probably see some Pro Bowl level flashes, but he's behind Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne on the depth chart right now. He'll be a part of a healthy rotation. And even though he's going to eat up some of their snaps, I still feel like those two guys are going to play more than he does, especially his rookie season. Whereas Mike Sanders still, there is no other slot corner option here right now. I mean, you could argue maybe we have some guys that are versatile enough that can step in as like a slot corner if you need them to, like a Quan Martin maybe, or I mean, maybe you can name some of those other guys in our secondary, but Mike Sanders still is like the only pure slot corner, like a Danny Johnson, where that's all you do. You are on this team to slot corner, and that's it. And I also just believe that Mike Sanders still is going to be an elite slot corner. Just like Chris Sims said, do not be surprised if he's the best slot corner in the NFL within a year or two. Nick Saban said he was the best player pound for pound out of this entire draft. Joe Klatt said that he was the best player on the best defense in college football. So many people had so much praise for Mike Sanders still. I believe Mike Sanders still was probably the pick that we made that was praised the most out of our entire draft class, even more than Jaden Daniels. We just look up his name on Twitter and all of the people that were very high on him. So I felt like Mike Sanders still just made too much sense here. I felt like it was an easy answer, but I also think that it is one of the right answers. I'm not going to say the right answer because I think Johnny Newton's going to be a great starter. I think a lot of these guys, I think Ben Sinnott, I think Brandon Coleman will eventually grow into one. I think Luke McCaffrey. I like Jordan McGee a lot. I love a lot of our draft picks, but if I had to just pick one guy that is like the most safe, this guy is going to be a solid starter for us for many years to come. Mike Sanders still is easily the best pick for me, again, especially excluding Jaden Daniels. We're just going to exclude Jaden Daniels from any of these categories. Then potential boom pick. Now, again, outside of Jaden Daniels, I was going to pick Luke McCaffrey because of his elite athleticism and very high ceiling. Brandon Coleman, same thing, elite athlete, very high ceiling. But I'm going to go with Ben Sinnott here because he tested as an elite athlete as well at the combine, but then he also comes with elite versatility. Whereas Luke McCaffrey, Brandon Coleman, you know, I mean, maybe you can make an argument for versatility there, but Ben Sinnott is the embodiment, the personification of the word versatility, man, especially when it comes to the tight end position. This guy was back there like as a running back sometimes, like with the quarterback and there's two running backs next to him, he would be that. He would be the fullback. He would be the inline tight end blocking. He'll be the big slot like a Mike Gesicki. He'll be out wide like a receiver, like a Darren Waller sometimes. This guy was any and everywhere and contributed in every way possible. He was the lead blocker. Probably my favorite play from him that I ever saw of his college tape was that time that it was like a quarterback keeper to the left, and not only did he pancake the edge rusher to start the play, and then he went and just completely bouncered and escorted, I think it was a DB or a linebacker, all the way basically into the locker room, and the quarterback went untouched for a touchdown because Ben Sinnott literally just rose grazed everybody out of the way. I mean, just professional security level type of stuff. Like, I mean, just ridiculous. And then on top of that, I think he had the most touchdown catches of any tight end in college football last year or something like that. I know he had like a high rate of contested catches. He's great after the catch as well. He may not be the fastest guy, but it's really hard to bring him down. We know from going against Zach Ertz for the past several years that even if you're not fast, you can pick up a lot of yards after catch just by being tough to bring down, and he brings that as well. I think when we're talking about potential boom pick, like how did this guy even make it out of the first round? How did this guy even make it to the second round? Even though some people feel like he should have been drafted in the third round or later, I think Ben Sinnott is the perfect pick for that. When we're talking about, again, outside of Jaden Daniels, potential boom, like where did this guy come from? People from across the football world are gonna be like, yo, Ben, who is this guy? Why is this guy just so deadly? Why do we have to stay up night after night game planning against this guy? Where did he come from? I think Ben Sinnott is definitely my pick there. I think he has so much potential and versatility. I think he's going to be a good player immediately week one, like day one, even with Zach Ertz out there with his versatility. But I think he has the potential, especially with him being an elite athlete, even though I have to admit, I do believe in his elite ceiling, but I feel like he tested better at the combine than the athlete that he actually is on tape. But he's still a great athlete on tape, and I think he's barely even scratched the surface, even with all of the versatility that he already has. And you can tell that Adam Peters has a plan for this guy. He's going to be the Kyle Juszczyk, George Kittle hybrid that Adam Peters comped him to after we took him. Now, as far as future depth player, I think Dominique Hampton is a good, solid pick here. In a role where he's more so around the box more often and using his length to cover tight ends and making plays against the run, just being a big guy, basically, rather than being like a true deep safety like he was used mostly at Washington. I think he can end up being a pretty good depth player for us, like a pretty good long-term player that is like heavily, our secondary is already going to be heavily rotational under Dan Quinn and Joe Wood Jr. They already said, stop asking me about 11 starters on defense. We're going to rotate people in and out so often, you don't really actually know who the starters are, because everybody's going to play like an equal amount of snaps, or maybe one per player A plays more snaps week one because of the matchup that we have to go against on offense, because they like to utilize tight ends, whereas maybe opponent of week two prefers to use quick, fast slot receivers and things like that. So maybe player B will play more. You just never know. It's going to be very matchup based. And I just feel like Dominique Hampton, even in that very heavily rotational secondary that we'll already have, I feel like he'll be a really good player that, based on offensive matchups and situations, could come in, can erase a tight end out of a game whenever you may need that to happen. If you need an extra DB on the field that can step up in the box but also cover, I think he'll just always be good. I don't see him as like a potential great starter necessarily. I don't necessarily see like future Pro Bowler, but I do see him being like a quality player that can contribute on Sundays, week in, week out, no matter how small or big his role ends up being, again, based on the offensive matchup that we have that week. I think his snaps, sometimes he'll maybe even only play single-digit snaps. Then sometimes he'll look like a starter out there with how many snaps he plays, just based completely on the offensive matchup. So don't be surprised, man, if Dominique Hampton ends up balling out for us. We'll see. And then the extra category that I made up myself, somebody that will outperform their draft pick. And I feel like Jordan McGee was just such an obvious answer for this. And for me personally, who was a fifth round pick, I have a strong feeling with his elite athleticism and instincts that he's already coming in with to the NFL. And then on top of that, the fact that he's learning from Ken Norton Jr. as a coach, Dan Quinn and Joe Wood Jr. as his defensive coordinator and head coach. But again, Ken Norton Jr. as the linebackers coach is insane. And then Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu as the guys that are taking you under their wings as your on the field coaches and basically mentors throughout this whole process. I think he's going to end up looking like a huge steal from the fifth round within like 2 to 3 years. I really believe that. Now, because Bobby Wagner will not be here forever. And I'm not saying that Jordan McGee will be the next Bobby Wagner or something like that. But I do feel like he will grow into a great right-hand man for Frankie Louvu as far as being a part of our long-term defense, especially the linebacker group. Because again, Bobby Wagner's not going to be here forever. So Frankie Louvu, once Bobby Wagner's done playing for the Washington Commanders, whether he retires, he ends up signing with somewhere else after this year, who knows? tackles, I think Jordan McGee will be like the guy to step up, and that will be our two-headed monster in the linebacker core. And again, I don't think that he'll end up being like Bobby Wagner in his prime, like a future first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm not saying that at all, but I do believe he'll be better than any linebacker that we've had here in between the era of London Fletcher to now when we have in Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu. I think he could be better than any of the linebackers we had in between. I really am just that high on Jordan McGee. I'm not saying that he'll be as great as Frankie Louvu. I'm definitely not saying he'll be as great as Bobby Wagner, but at least be better than the terrible run of linebackers that we've had since going all the way back to London Fletcher. It pretty much in between there. It hasn't been great. We've had flashes. We've had the occasional player maybe give us like a season or two. I think Jordan McGee will be one of our answers at linebacker long term as a solid starter. I'm really a big fan of his talent and how Dan Quinn and Joe Wood Jr. especially will learn how to use him, and Ken Norton Jr. will coach him up. And I mean, Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu, man, and the fact that he can come in and he's not going to be pressured to play immediately, but there is a role for him, especially in coverage, because Bobby Wagner has history of being great in coverage. But I mean, your body catches up to you eventually, and he had the most tackles in a season of his NFL career last year. So the mileage is piling up. That's a good thing and kind of a bad thing, that type of stat, especially for a guy like Bobby Wagner. But he's still great against the run. He's still going to be the quarterback of the defense. But at the same time, man, we don't want Bobby Wagner going out there and covering the other team's best tight ends and best receivers, running backs out of the backfield consistently. He can handle it when he needs to, but we don't want him doing that all the time. Frankie Louvu, the definition of versatility. He can blitz up the A-gap. He can come off the edge. He can stop the run. He can do all of that. He can cover a little bit too, but that's not his specialty. You could argue that between Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu, coverage in the linebacker group is probably our biggest remaining weakness before we drafted Jordan McGee. And Jordan McGee comes out of the draft already. I feel like he has a great skill set for being a great coverage linebacker. So I feel like he can contribute day one just off of his coverage ability. And I think over the course of this rookie season, or however long it takes for Bobby Wagner to eventually stop playing in linebacker for the Commanders, I feel like that time will give him like a great safety blanket to develop on his own time, the right way, at the right tempo, rather than being rushed out there to start for us immediately. I feel like it's the perfect combination to get the most out of Jordan McGee within like the next 2 to 3 years. I'm very excited about his potential. I truly believe in him, and that's why he's my pick for the guy that will most likely outlive their draft pick selection. Even though you could argue Mike Sainristil should have been a first round pick, I think he's going to end up outplaying his draft pick. I think Johnny Newton the same thing, but with the fact that Jordan McGee was a 5th round pick, I think he's going to go out there and end up looking like, man, he should have been drafted at least by the 2nd round. We'll be saying that once we look back like 3 years from now. Just go ahead and write it down, put my name next to it. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section, let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please still farm that like button, still farm the subscription button, still farm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content, and of course, let me know in the comment section how you feel about Walter Football's picks for his categories, and let me know how you feel about my picks for my categories. Let me know if you agree or disagree with anything he said, with anything I said, and also if you wanted to do this yourself. Between the 5 categories between the 4 that he had, and then I took away Bust but added a 5th one, well, technically a 4th for me, but you could do all 5 categories that were represented in this video. If y'all want to give your answers for those in the comment section, I would also really appreciate that. I'm gonna try my best to read and reply to as many comments as possible. And again, do not leave this video without leaving a like. I'm trying my best to come with at least some sort of like daily content, at least once a day. So make sure y'all stay tuned. I really appreciate y'all, and I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.